Excellent. Thank you very much, and good day to all of the attendees today. What I want to lead you to are some of the principles of what it takes to become either a high trust leader or a high trust advisor. In other words, how experts, people who are technically excellent at what they do, and leaders who are in strong and authoritative positions can become better at influencing either their stakeholders, their boards, or create a more effective ability to be able to attract and win clients. Fundamentally, there are about 7 different principles which address this area, but I'm only in a position to address maybe 2 or 3 of them with you today. But I'm happy to take any questions on the other areas after this presentation has completed. The first thing I'd like to do about talking around how experts and leaders become influencers is to talk about the difference between trust and high trust. I think no leader and no effective influencer can be successful unless they're in a position to build a high level of trust with their clients or with their stakeholders or with their teams. In order to be a successful influencer, it's absolutely critical that we're able to build very strong levels of rapport and engagement with people. It's no longer enough just to be able to communicate with people. We have to be able to connect with them, to involve them, and to engage with them at a very deep level. So the difference between the trust and the high trust I want to speak about is that you may have certain relationships with people that you trust and that you like, but perhaps you may not share everything with them. Now, in business, it's very common to have such relationships where we have a degree of trust between ourselves and someone else, but we still don't share everything that we have with them. There's some degree of hesitancy, some degree of resistance. We hold back a certain amount of information. Now, to be a successful influencer, whether that's to be able to attract and win clients, or whether that's being able to lead teams or boards, we have to create what I call a high trust relationship. Now, a high trust relationship is a relationship where there is no restrictions, no hesitation, no reservations, no limitations whatsoever in that relationship. In other words, that person sees you as someone who absolutely compels their attention, someone they want to engage with, someone that they want to share everything they have with you without any hesitation or reservation. If you can create that kind of relationship, then either as an expert who needs to be able to win clients, or as a leader inside an organization, you're in a position to exert a powerful degree of influence and affect change for that individual and for your organization. The other thing that we need to look at is the change in what it takes to be an influencer opposed to being an expert or a leader. In the old model of management, or in the old model of business development, it was sufficient to be an expert. In other words, to be technically excellent at what you did, to know your information, to know your facts, to know your figures. Or to be a leader, it was sufficient simply to be in a position of authority. However, things have changed and changed radically. It's no longer enough just to be professionally excellent at what you do. You also have to be personable. In other words, you have to be a person that people want to engage with and they want to connect with. And that's the difference when it comes to being either an expert who is excellent at what he does, or being someone who's in the position to influence change. So, for example, let me put it in these terms. No matter how expert you are at what you do, you may still struggle when it comes to winning clients, for example. The reason that is that when you are expert at what you do, if they don't know you, if they don't like you, and if they don't have a high degree of trust with you, then they're not really going to consider you and use your services. In other words, you never get a chance to be able to deploy all that wonderful expertise that you have. It's the same with being a leader. The thing about being a leader is that it's not enough simply to have a position of power anymore. What you have to be able to do is to influence change. And particularly now, as we're dealing more and more with the generation that they call millennials, that is the people born in the early 80s who are now moving into middle management positions, and who we are engaging with more and more in terms of being able to affect change. So the difference is that it's no longer enough just to be technically excellent. It's no longer enough just to have a position of authority. We have to be powerful and compelling communicators and connectors with people. And that's the difference between simply being an expert or a leader and being a powerful influencer. In fact, I often don't differentiate between maybe a situation where you're in a position where you have to sell or where you're in a position to where you have to lead. In effect, they both are based on the same principle. A lot of experts are nervous of the concept of selling, but the word selling comes from a root word, I believe is a Scandinavian word, which is selge, which means to be of service. So if you're in a position of being an expert, you become successful at winning more clients when you find better ways to be able to be of service to them, when you get them to share their challenges with you so you can deliver your expertise to solve those challenges. Equally, old-fashioned management or leadership was very much based upon a command and control concept. I am the person in charge, therefore you will do what I say. But unfortunately, that model doesn't work anymore. Increasingly, the way the model needs to work now is the leadership is seen as what we call servant-based leadership. So in other words, we as leaders see ourselves as people who are of service to our stakeholders, of service to our teams, of service to our organizations. In other words, our job today is to be of service in such a way that we can create the environment in which our teams, in which our boards, in which our stakeholders can be tremendously successful. We facilitate success. We no longer command success. So this is the difference, this movement, if you will, from a very left-brain masculine approach to how we've done things in the past to a much more right-brained, intuitive, influencing approach in terms of how we affect change in organizations and in terms of how we win clients today. So what I want to share with you, having laid the groundwork for where we are and where we're going, is just 3 of the areas that any expert or any leader needs to become successful in order to be a compelling influencer in today's world or today's business place. The first thing we want to look at is we want to look at a situation where we're able to create messages that compel attention. So in other words, we have an issue today where the attention span of individuals, certainly based on some research done by Microsoft in 2015, indicates that attention span are now 9 seconds or less. That's not a lot of time if you want to grab and hold a person's attention. So our messaging has to change. And the challenge that we have in most messaging, whether we're in a position to be able to market something, whether we're in a position to be able to make an presentation, in many cases we still focus most of those messages on logic. And I'm here to tell you that logic no longer compels attention. But I will share with you what does in just a moment. The second area that we want to look at, or the third point here that I want to look at, is the area of how you use networking as a means to build your professional or your leadership brand. Now, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon.com, said that your personal and professional brand is what people say about you when you were in the room, or when you're no longer in the room, my apologies. So when you've left that room, people are going to speak about you, they're going to talk about you, they're going to share their experiences about you. And those things that they say will have a powerful impact on your ability to access and gain the attention of other people. So your ability to network, either to win new clients or to build your leadership brand inside your organization or in your wider industry, is a critical skill set to be able to have. Unfortunately, networking is not something that people are very comfortable with, but hopefully I'll be able to share with you a couple of ideas that will help you become a little more comfortable, a little bit more confident with that. The last area I want to look at today is how to become a personable presenter. For many of us, presenting is something that we're not very comfortable with. And as a result, we deliver very structured, very formal presentations. The problem with structured and very formal presentations is, again, they no longer hold the attention of the client or no longer hold the attention of the audience that you want to influence. As a result of that, there's a couple of key areas that we need to look at in order to make our presentation significantly more compelling. So out of this presentation that we have today, I want to share a couple of things with you. One is how you create messages that compel attention. 2, some skills around how you network to build your brand and get access to key decision makers. And 3, how to become a personable and more effective presenter. Whether you're presenting in order to win or engage clients, or whether you're presenting in order to deliver a corporate speech, or what we call a town hall, when a CEO or a C-suite level leader has to present to a group of people within the organization. So given the outline of what we're going to look at today, the first thing I want to look at is how we create compelling messages, how we engage people in such a way that they absolutely are totally engaged by our presentation and are effectively won over or influenced to our way of doing things, our way of seeing things. So the first thing we need to look at is to understand the difference between logic and emotion. And in this case, I want to talk about the power of brands and how brands have a powerful and compelling impact on people. Most people think, and in fact, if you look at organizations, most of the messages that you project out into the marketplace, or indeed into your own people, are very logical. They make a lot of sense. The problem with logic is it no longer compels attention. The thing that does compel attention, however, is emotion. University of Cranfield did some research that indicated that 90% of our business decisions are made based on emotion, not on logic. Now, that's a very powerful and important point to bear in mind. 90% of the decisions that we make are based on emotion, not on logic. How we feel, not how we think. So it is emotion that compels attention, but it is logic that justifies those decisions. And that's important to understand that structure. It's emotion that compels or helps somebody makes the decision, drives the motivation to make the decision, but it is the logic that justifies the decision once it is made. And just talking about that, I want to talk about one particular brand, which many of you will be familiar with, and that is the motor organization Volkswagen. And Volkswagen, as we know, recently has fallen into some disrepute. Their brand has been damaged as a result of some degree of dishonesty. But before that happened, and even still, Volkswagen owns Seat, they own Skoda, they own Audi. So they own 4 different very popular motoring brands. Now, the interesting thing is if you take each of those brands, so you have Volkswagen, you have Audi, you have Seat, you have Skoda, there is a world of difference in perception between, say, an Audi and a Skoda. Certainly here in Europe, the Skoda would have been considered as a very low cost, very poor substitute for a car. In other words, a car most people would not spend a lot of money on. Now, they've worked a lot on that in recent years, but the brand that still resonates with people is that it's a low-cost option in terms of an automobile. On the other hand, the Audi is considered a very high-class car. And what's interesting is the differentiation in price between, say, a top-of-the-range Audi and a top-of-the-range Skoda might be something in the order of 70 or 80 or even $100,000 or euros. That's a significant degree in terms of price, between $100,000 for the top-of-the-range Audi versus maybe less than that for the Skoda. Now, what's interesting, however, is that as an engineer, if you look at these organizations, Volkswagen has fundamentally been a very Germanic organization, obviously a fully owned German organization, are very structured in their approach to how to make cars. So if you were to look at a top-of-the-range Skoda and you were to look at a top-of-the-range Audi, then what you would typically see is you'll see a car with 4 wheels, with leather, with air conditioning, with Bluetooth facility, effectively the same thing. They will be built on the same structural platform, the same mechanistic platform. They will use very similar equipment. Fundamentally, the only difference between these two mechanical products are the brand that they carry. In other words, the emotional response that the brand engages in people. And what we're talking about here is, we're talking about a situation where people will, even with, if we take a situation between a very high-level Skoda, what are the values associated with that Skoda? Well, the values associated with a Skoda might be values like economical, safe, family, and these sort of brands will appeal, or these values will appeal to certain individuals. On the other hand, the Audi, at top of the range, Audi will have a different set of values. It'll have values like power, strength, ego, status, ambition. And you'll get 2 very different kinds of people who will buy these particular cars. You'll get very wealthy people who will still only buy a top-of-the-range Skoda, because despite the fact that they are wealthy, their values are the values presented by this brand: economy, stability, family, safety, we'll say. On the other hand, you'll get people who will mortgage their children in order to own an Audi, because for them, the values that are critical are the power, the status, and the ambition. And they'll go and make tremendous sacrifices in order to own that kind of car, because it represents what's critically important to them. It represents the emotional triggers that effectively drive their motivation, or what makes them do what they do. And this is important to understand. Either as an expert who wants to win clients, or as a leader who wants to win influence over your colleagues or your stakeholders, understanding the power of values and of emotion are fundamentally critical to how successful you become as an influencer. So this point here is simply to indicate the difference between logic versus emotion. Emotion drives the decision. Logic justifies that decision. If you want influence, you need to understand what drives decisions. The second point, as I said earlier, is this concept of diminishing attention spans. And I indicated already the concept of Microsoft's research in 2015, which indicates that attention span are now 9 seconds or less. So we need to put emotion into the messaging in order to make it effective. So typically, in a situation where you are maybe in a position looking to win clients, or whether you're in a position to win over the attention or the engagement of a board, we typically develop our messages using these unique selling points. Let me just keep this in the simple context of winning clients, for example, because this is the one that most people will be familiar with. If I want to market my services, or I want to market my products, I will typically have a set of USPs, or unique selling points. There's only one problem with the unique selling points, and that is there's a pretty good chance that my competitors use exactly the same unique selling points. And as a result of that, they're not really unique at all. The other thing about unique selling points is they're typically highly logical. If I were to look at your websites or look at your marketing material, there's a pretty good chance that I will see very logical reasons as to why I should use your services or why I should engage you. But there's also a pretty good chance they no longer compel my attention. They no longer engage me enough to make a decision to use your services. So in order to change that, one of the things we need to do is we need to be able to create what we call points of compelling relevance. And points of compelling relevance are points that lead with emotion and justify with logic. So let me give you a simple example of what I mean. One of the organizations I work quite a lot with are legal firms. And typically, a few of the partners in a legal firm coming in to make a presentation to a CEO or a leader of an organization, when they're asked what's important or what can you do for me, they will use a very logical reason for engaging. They will say, well, we give you direct access to our partners. Now, for a legal firm, that's a very important thing because their partners carry most of the knowledge. They are in a position to add the most value to a client. The problem is, however, that sitting down at the table is a CEO who's got a very limited attention span. He's got a lot of things that are pulling at his attention. He's got a lot of things that are looking for more information from him. So there's only two questions going through his head at this point in time. When the lawyer says, we give you access to our partners, he's thinking, so what? What does that do for me? And in fact, every one of our clients are thinking exactly the same thing if we're interested in engaging with them. They're thinking, when we're putting our message across, they're trying to determine value. They're thinking, so what? What does that do for me? So a clever lawyer or a clever engineer or a clever accountant or a clever leader will understand that he or she needs to lead with the emotional value and then justify it with the logic afterwards. So one of the things I say to legal firms is if you go into a CEO, again, this is what you will say. Think about what's most compellingly relevant to the CEO in the position that he's in. What are his challenges? What are his problems? What is the pain that you're going to resolve? If you can think about the pain that you are going to resolve for that particular person and come up with the solution and then deliver that in terms of what you're going to give them, you will immediately engage their attention right from the start. So let's take our lawyer friends again. Usually they would walk in and say, well, we will give you access to our clients. And the CEO is thinking, well, so what? What does that do for me? But what if they came in and they said this instead? What if they came in and said, Mr. CEO, we're going to help you make faster, more effective business decisions because we give you direct access to our partners. What if we were to help you make faster, more effective business decisions because we're going to give you direct access to our partners? That's a very different message. Because what they're doing now is they're grabbing the attention of the client or the CEO in this case simply because they're resolving the problem right from the start. They're indicating that we understand your problem and we are the solution. That is the emotional part of the message. And then the second part of the message is the logical reason in terms of how they're going to deliver on that, which is because we give you access to our partners. Now, if you're looking at any messages that you want to put across, either to potential clients or to a board or to a team, you have to work with that particular format in order to create a compelling message. The first is, what's the value you're going to deliver? What is the pain you're going to resolve? And then using the word because, you justify it with the logical reason for how you can deliver on that. Once you can create that, makes a powerful, powerful impression. I did some work with a company called BT, British Telecom, a little while ago, and just being able to bring this simple principle to bear earned them a £52 million a year contract, simply because what they did when they understood that to move from using simple, unique selling points to be able to use points of compelling relevance, you need to make your language much more simple, much more meaningful, and much more present tense. They suddenly understood that they could offer things that the competitors that they were going up against couldn't offer. And as a result, they won the contract. They won the contract because they created a compelling message, because they led with emotion, and they justified it with logic. So whenever you're creating messages for any presentations in the future, think about lead with the emotion, the solution, how you solve the pain, and then justify it with the logic afterwards. If you can understand that simple principle, it will add a tremendous amount of power to your ability to present and to affect change in the minds of other people. So the first element, the principle I wanted to cover, was just how do we create compelling messages, either as experts who want to win clients or as leaders who want to influence stakeholders. The second area that I wanted to address is the area of networking to build your brand. Now, as I said before, Jeff Bezos of Amazon.com said that your brand is what people say about you when you're no longer in the room. It is the resonance that you leave behind you, the things that they talk about when you're not there. And networking is a very specific purpose. Your personal brand is one thing in terms of being able to project that. But another reason you might want to network is to get access to key decision makers, either within your organization or in terms of people that you may want to provide your services or your businesses or your products to. So access is a critical piece too. It is getting harder and harder and harder to get access to people in the traditional ways through phone or through email or through other forms of personal marketing. Networking, as in personal networking, as in going one-to-one, being in the right room with the right people at the right time with the right skills, is the single most powerful business tool or brand building tool that an executive or an expert has available at their command. So it's really critical that you know how to do this and do this properly. Now, that said, networking, despite the fact that it is such a powerful and useful tool, is also probably the single most uncomfortable thing you'll ever do in public. At least it is for most people. I mean, effectively, there's two kinds of people who go networking. One, there's what I call the mad extroverted person who look at a room full of strangers and go, wow, this is fantastic. Out they go and start giving their cards and introducing themselves to people. And they work their way through the entire room. Unfortunately, because they're being intrusive, because they're interrupting conversations, because they're not sufficiently aware of what they're doing, they are damaging their brand and they're burning their opportunities to engage with people. Now, for most normal people, typically what we do is we look at a room full of strangers and we suddenly go, oh my goodness, what am I doing here? And all of a sudden, we develop what I call a 10-minute syndrome. We start thinking to ourselves, well, if nobody talks to me in the next 10 minutes, I am out of here. Because we're uncomfortable, and perfectly understandably. One of my areas of expertise is as a psychotherapist. And I can tell you as a psychotherapist that the single biggest need in all human beings is to be accepted, to be wanted, to be needed, to be invited in, to be part of the group. And the last thing we want is rejection. The problem with rejection is that's the first thing we're likely to face when we walk into what appears to be just a large group of people. And as a result, we don't engage successfully. So what I want to do in this section of the presentation is share with you just a couple of ideas that might actually make networking significantly easier for you when you have that opportunity to engage with other people in the future. The other benefit of networking is if you've chosen the right room to be in, the two people that you're going to meet in that room are either going to be decision makers, who are people you want to get access to and build a relationship with, or they're going to be referrers of potential business, or people who can open doors for you to connect with the people that you want to get access to. So in the networking room, everybody matters. So we need to think about what the objective to networking is. And many people traditionally think that the objective to networking is to walk into the room, and I'll use the word advisedly, sell what you do. So sell your service, sell yourself, sell your products. Basically get in there, and as soon as you've met somebody, immediately start giving them the pitch about who you are, or about your organization, or about the value that you can bring. Well, let me share some bad news with you. Nobody cares. The reality is that when you go into a networking room, people are there to meet other people. They are not there to receive a business pitch from you. And as soon as you start to project that business pitch, they will shut down, and they will try to find a way to get away from you. Also, the other reason is I doubt very much if, as an expert, you can present the value of what you have in the couple of seconds of attention that you'll have in that room. So the objective of networking is never to attempt to sell or to pitch your information when you're in the room. The purpose of networking, the objective of networking, is when you go into a room is to get at least 3 people who agree to have a cup of coffee with you after the event. Now that's very important. The purpose or objective to networking is to get at least 3 people, or just start with 1 person if you're more comfortable with that, who agree to have a cup of coffee or to meet you for lunch after the event. Now, that's very important, because what that means is in the room, you can stop trying to pitch what you do. Stop trying to sell what you do. As I said, nobody cares. Your only focus when you're there, which goes to helping build your personal brand, is to get that person that you meet to get to know you, to get to like you, and to get to trust you. And somebody who knows you, likes you, and trusts you as a result of the conversation that you have with them is very likely to give you that 30 minutes for a coffee or that hour for a lunch. Now, if you get that, that is where you create the opportunity to present or to pitch or to build a relationship, not in the networking space. That's 30 minutes of absolute dedicated attention, or an hour over lunch of dedicated attention. This is where you talk about the value you can bring to the client, but not necessarily in the networking room. Now, a couple of the points that will help with that is, first of all, understanding the group psychology. So when you walk into a room, it's not just a mass of people. It's not just some huge mass of people that all seem to be moving around. All rooms or all networking groups organize themselves in very specific ways, and knowing what those ways are allows you to be able to recognize the people that you can engage with and that you're guaranteed to be accepted by, i.e. not rejected by. So the first thing you're going to see when you walk into a room is you're going to see an individual who is standing on his own. Now, in the case of a person standing on their own, they're also like you, looking to network. They want to get in, they want to engage, they want to get involved. The problem is they don't know how. So if you were to come and engage them, they will be very open to you connecting with them, provided we connect with them in the right way. I'm going to share with you how to do that as well. So very important to understand that any individual who's standing on his own is most likely somebody that is very happy to connect with you if you know how to introduce yourself in the correct manner. So first of all, in terms of targets in the room, we have individuals. Secondly, what you'll have in the room is you'll have what we call open groups. Now, an open group is a group of 2, 3, 4, even 5 people that you will see standing around in what is effectively a semicircle. So in other words, the circle has not yet closed over. They do have their backs turned out to everybody else. There's still a space there that you can see in that particular group. Now, if you see that space, what it's saying is that this group is only forming and norming. In other words, they're only just getting together. They haven't yet created rapport. They haven't yet created a degree of trust where they all close over, looking to exclude anybody else. Now, that group is also a perfect opportunity for you to engage with. And the ideal group is a group with maybe 3 people, where you make up the 4th person. Once you join, that group will then close, excluding everybody else out of that group until the group itself breaks up. So your second target of opportunity is always going to be an open group of people. So you look for them, you look to engage, Once you engage with them, you now own that group, and you're in a position to reach out and connect with whoever you choose to connect within that group that you see of value. Now, the third thing that you will see in the room is what we call a closed group. Now, a closed group is a group that already is in rapport. They all know each other, they're in a conversation, and they do not wish for anybody else to enter the group. Now, if the person you want to talk to is in that group, then leave it for a little while, because the group will eventually break up. And as it breaks up, it'll either form itself again as individuals, or they'll join an open group, and that's your opportunity for engagement. Now, there are other techniques for engaging closed groups, but we haven't time to go through them today. So just keep thinking about them. When you walk into a room, it's not just a mass of people. There will be a lot of individuals, and there'll be a lot of open groups, and all of a sudden, it means that this room is a room that's available to you because you're aware of who you can connect with and who you should leave alone. Now, the next point on this that I want to just cover is, how do you introduce yourself? So how do you engage with a person? Well, very simply, the way you engage yourself is simply ask permission. It's very important to remember that networking is never about you, it's always about the other person. So the best way to ask permission is to walk up to the person, make eye contact with them, smile, and then simply ask this question. May I join you? Or would you mind if I join you? May I join you? Or would you mind if I join you? It's simple politeness. It's requesting permission. But that form of words will, in every single situation, whether it's an individual or an open group, have you invited in or engaged by the other person. Now, all of a sudden, once you do this, you are never likely to be in any way intrusive or difficult or seen as pushy. You're requesting to engage. And when you request to engage, people become a lot more open to being engaged in the first place, and the relationship has now started. So remember that. May I join you, or would you mind if I joined you? I guarantee you, if you're dealing with an individual or if you're dealing with an open group, the answer to that question will always be yes. And all of a sudden, that room now becomes yours to work effectively. You become master of the room. Now, there's one element here which is exiting a conversation, but I just want to briefly talk about what happens when you do meet that person. There is a conversational structure that you can use, and typically those conversations would be, and I'll just give you the very first question that starts it off so you can begin the conversation. Most people, when they meet someone for the first time, will typically ask a question like, so what do you do? This question gets asked because what the other person is trying to identify is what's the value that you have that you can give them. What's the value? So what do you do? The problem is that if you ask that question and they tell you what they do, they may very well simply answer by saying, well, actually, I'm a CEO, or I'm a lawyer, or I'm an accountant, or I'm an engineer, or I'm a technology specialist. If they give you that answer, that pretty much ends the conversation. So a better question to start a conversation with is, so what's your connection with this event? What brings you here today? What's your connection with the event? What brings you here today? Now, that's a very different kind of question, because what that does is that encourages the other person to share more than just what they do. They'll probably say, well, I'm the CEO of such and such a company. We're here because we're looking to connect with other companies, or we're here because we're sponsoring the event. And all of a sudden, you now have a subject of conversation which is based entirely on the other person. And if you're in a networking situation, you want the other person to do most of the talking. Other questions that you can use later on could be, have you traveled far to be here? It's a universal question. People have all come from someplace, and again, it opens the opportunity to engage. So this is how you structure a conversation and make it easier. If you'd like to find out more about that, I'm very happy to send on an ebook that will help you with your networking skills. Just let us know at the end of the presentation. Last point I want to share with you is how you exit a conversation. So let us say you've been getting on very well with the person, or perhaps you haven't been getting on very well with the person, and it's time maybe to move on. The very best way to exit a conversation is to give the person the opportunity to leave you. And how we do that is we actually, so you know you've come to the end of the natural conversation, or you know it's time for you to move on, or they know it's time for you to move on, but neither of you know how to do that. Now, in the past, that may have led to a certain degree of discomfort. Like, you know the conversation's over, they know the conversation's over, but neither of you know how to get out of there. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask them a simple question, and we're going to invite them to join us to do something else. So what we would say is, I'm going for a coffee, would you like to join me? I'm going to the buffet, would you like to join me? Now, that might sound like a very unusual question. Why would you want to invite somebody to join you when you're looking to move on or you're looking to exit a conversation? Well, very simply, what that question does, it allows them to leave you rather than you leave them. So in other words, they might then at that point say, no, actually, I've seen a colleague, I'm going to go join them. It's been lovely talking to you. I look forward to having the coffee. That's perfect because now they have exited themselves, leaving you free to continue networking and move around the room. However, the answer to the question might also be, yes, I'd love to, which was probably not the answer you were looking for. At that point, you now have to manage this person. So how do you do that? Well, you go and get your coffee, or you go to the buffet, you look around and you're looking for an open group of people, usually not more than 3. And then you say to the person that you're with, let us join this group here. You go and you make the introductions, may we join you? They will say yes, and you will join and become a closed group, with you still in a position to continue to network, and the person you brought with you in a position to network as well. Now, at a certain point, what you've done is you can turn to the person you brought with you and say, it's been lovely meeting you. I'm going to see a colleague of mine. I will call you for that coffee as agreed next week or whenever it happens to be. At that point, you can now leave the group, leaving the person you originally wanted to exit from in the group behind you. See, people often don't want to say goodbye to you because they don't want to be left back out in the networking jungle. But what you've done now is you haven't dumped them. You haven't dropped them into the situation. Remember, being able to manage emotion is the means by which you influence logical decisions. So we want them to have a positive feeling about us. So we never dump people, but it's perfectly okay to park them. And that's what we've done in this situation, allowing us to continue to network and then follow up that person at a later stage to do it. So as an expert or as a leader, knowing how to network and to do it successfully and professionally is the means by which you will access decision makers and build the brand that will build your business or build your leadership influence. The last point I want to complete my presentation on is becoming a personable presenter, which is how we make presentations. And the more senior we are, the more important presentations become. Unfortunately, for most people, we tend to think of presentations as formal presentations, highly structured, all about presenting logic, all about presenting facts and figures and information. But really, I want you to stop thinking about presentations as formal presentations. I want you to think about it as a conversation. Now, the difference between a presentation and a conversation is a presentation is simply a download of information. It's simply providing facts and figures and information and documents and data, which is all very well, but it's not very compelling. It's not a way in which you're influencing the audience. It's not a way in which you're controlling what's going on in their heads and therefore influencing the outcomes of the presentation. If you think about it, however, as a conversation, that changes everything, because a conversation is different to a presentation. A conversation involves things such as questions. Even though those questions may only be answered in the mind of the audience, as soon as you ask a question, you control what the audience is thinking. So questions are powerful ways to either open up a presentation because it gets the audience thinking about what you want them to think about, in other words, what you're going to present on. It gets them thinking about how the world might be different as a result of listening to your presentation or understanding your expertise or using your abilities. It's a very powerful way to start a conversation. The other thing that would happen in conversations would be, for example, stories. So we may tell stories, for example, in a conversation. Most people don't think about telling stories in presentations because it's a very formal environment. But in a conversation, stories have a powerful place. And stories are powerful when we're engaging audiences of any kind, for the simple reason that people live the story. If you have stories that are yours, stories of real situations that have occurred, ways in which you solved problems for clients, ways in which you were successful for the organization that people can learn from, then use those stories in your presentations. It makes you much more personable, and it absolutely compels the attention of the audience. And most importantly, what happens is that they will actually follow the story as if they're a part of the story themselves. And that is a very powerful and compelling way to get them to take on the learning that you want to share with them. So the thing about a presentation is it's a transmission. It's only going one way. But a conversation is two-way. And if you have a two-way conversation, the more involved the audience is in the presentation that you're doing as a conversation, the more likely they are to be compelled and influenced by what you do. The second point is thinking about the structure of a presentation. I go to a lot of organizations who make pitches and presentations, and I still see the traditional presentation. And it starts usually with who we are, how long we've been around, what we do, how many people we have. Here's a point I made earlier. Nobody cares. Nobody's interested. Nobody has the time or the attention to focus on that anymore. So we need to change the way we present our information. Instead of now leading with who we are and what we do, what we should now lead with is what we're going to do for them. So we start with what we're going to deliver for them, what they will have when the presentation is over, what they will understand better, what they will see works more effectively, what will solve their problem. If you start with a what they're going to get, that compels their engagement. And then the presentation follows a simpler format. The next question they're going to have in their mind, in which you deliver on, is how are you going to do that? And then finally they'll ask, why are you the people to do that? But at that point, they're already convinced you're the right person. Why? Because you've demonstrated right from the start what their problem is and how you're going to solve it. You're talking about how you're going to deliver those results. And then lastly, you explain why you are the right person to do that. So think about your structures in future. Think about delivering upfront the what, the points of compelling relevance that we talked about at the start of this presentation. That's what you want up there in the very first slide. Then we'll talk about how you deliver, and lastly, you talk about why you are the perfect choice. The third point about this is the tools that engage audiences. And the point I was talking about here is, I've kind of already covered this, which is the idea of using questions, the idea of using stories and how compelling they are. And one other area is never be afraid to use humor. Get the audience to laugh, or get the audience to engage. Now, if humor is not something you're comfortable with, that's fine. You don't even go there. But if you've had stories that you've used before that people have laughed at, then use them again. And particularly stories that indicate you as being the issue or the fool or the joke or the problem, because people love to laugh with you. If people laugh in your presentation, it raises the energy of the room. It removes their analytical thinking and allows you to download a point or your main point directly into their unconscious brain, which is where their emotions are based. And they are building very powerful rapport with you. So your key tools are stories, questions, and humor. Think about using those, but not jokes, humor. Last point here is how to structure a town hall or corporate presentation. If you have a presentation coming up to a large group of people and it needs to be quick and needs to be effective, it's very simple. The way you start it is, you start it as follows. One, you start it either with a story that's relevant to them, or you start it with a question that's relevant to them, that engages their attention. And then the structure afterwards is very simple. You deliver a point, whatever point you want to make, and then you tell a story about how that point happened or why it's relevant. And then you deliver another point, and you tell a story that's relevant to that point. And then you deliver another point, and you tell a story that's relevant. And then you finish with a powerful statement or a powerful promise for the future. And a real way to engage a large number of people is to start with a powerful story or a question. Make the point you want to make and then tell a story, because that personalizes it, makes it human. Make the next point you want to make and then tell another story. Make the next point and tell another story. Typically 3 points, 3 stories, and then close with a powerful and resonant ending. It's worth your while thinking about what's the most powerful ending, because the last thing you want them to remember is how powerful you are and how personable you are as a presenter. So in this short period of time, really, we've just had a couple of ideas to look at, which is how to create compelling messages, how to be able to network more effectively, how to become a personable presenter. I mean, there are other areas you need to look at. How to be able to work with different personality types, how to be able to command and control any meeting through advanced questions and values elicitation. But hopefully this is giving you a very quick feel for what's involved. So I'm very happy now, if you have questions, to open the floor and answer them for you.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Sean Weafer. Folks, we are now open for question and answers. So if you have any questions, you could either put it in the question box or you could equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the console, so please click on it if you want to talk directly with Mr. Weafer. So let me go to the question box. There are a couple of questions already posted, so let me go to the first one. In a networking event, you can't fake around most of the times to hide the purpose of your meeting with a new person, which is to build a network. So why not be candid and short and just share the business cards or any tip for having a direct talk to get to know the other person and introduce yourself?
Yep. I think that's a good question. I think the problem is that if you haven't built a relationship with that person, then effectively they will see you as intrusive. So in other words, if you're immediately just trying to sell your business, first of all, you haven't qualified if that person is of value to you in the first place. So there is a way to do that. And that is, I said earlier, when somebody asks you, what do you do? You'll ask the other person what's their connection with the event, and then they will ask you, what do you do? This is how you qualify a client. We call it raise the pain and position the gain. So in other words, let us say, for example, that you're an accountant working in a small business environment, and you go to a small business conference and you want to market your service. If a small business person comes up to you and says, what do you do? And you simply answer by saying, I'm an accountant, here's my card, what they're going to be thinking is, well, I have one of those, I don't need you. So you haven't demonstrated any value. And immediately what they have done is discounted any use you are to them. So there's no chance of you ever doing business with them. If, on the other hand, you've gone in and you don't say you're an accountant, but what you say is the following. You ask a question which positions a pain point. So you've done your research before you walk into the small business conference, and you realize that for most small businesses, let's say, the big challenge for them is getting access to money or cash or funds. We'll say that's the big problem in the room. You would then lead the answer to the question, what do you do, by saying, do you know the way most small businesses have real challenges getting access to funds to grow their business? Now, if you ask that question, a person who is of value to you is automatically going to say yes to that question, because that's the problem that they're trying to solve. A person who does not have any interest in that is not a person you're interested in continuing the conversation with, because they have just self-qualified themselves as not being relevant to you. But if the answer to the question, do you know the way most small businesses have challenges getting access to credit, if the answer to that is yes, then your answer is, well, my company helps small businesses get access to that kind of credit to grow their business. That person who just said yes will now say the magic words, tell me more. So they have just qualified themselves as being of value to you. So there's a reason why you don't just straight up and go marketing what you do, and why you ask this question, do you know the way? Well, I'm the person who does this. By delivering the pain, then delivering the gain, you've now qualified the person. You know for a fact that person is now interested in what you have to offer. You also know for a fact who isn't, and you can minimize those conversations and move on more quickly to people who are of value to you. So it's much more effective in terms of your time and getting clear potential prospects or opportunities after a meeting than just simply handing a card and telling people what you do.
Thank you very much. We have another one from Brother Muhammad Rafiq. The question is, what can be done if the person on the other side asks many questions regarding the business that you are in? How could you cut short the conversation, reserving the details discussion for later?
I think that's a very good question. I think if the person who's talking to you is genuinely interested in what you do, one of the questions you might ask is, you might say, what areas specifically are you most challenged by? So what areas specifically, so you seem interested in what we do, what areas specifically are you most challenged by? The reason they're asking you all those questions is they're trying to find out if you can solve a particular problem for them. So you can short circuit that by asking the question, what area specifically are you most challenged by? What area could I be of most service to you? Now, when they answer that question, you now know immediately how you're going to be of value to them. However, you do not want to make your sales pitch there. You still want to get a coffee afterwards because you want more time. There's no way you can deliver the value that your business offers in a very short period of time in a very distracted environment. So what you would say in that case is, well, that's quite a specific area. We need a little bit more time than we have here today. How about we arrange to have a coffee or to have some lunch, and I'd be happy to go through that with you. So move directly to moving to get a coffee or a lunch. Once they agree that, you can end the conversation and move on to your next prospect.
Thank you very much. And we have another one from Brother Mir Mustafa Ali Hashmi. The question is, when you are working for sales, how would you catch the attention of buyers? What questions do you raise? A bit general.
Okay, there's two areas there. One, there's what's on your websites and what's on your marketing material. And then there's what you do when you're in the networking room. So the first one is in terms of your, or indeed your presentations, all those areas are relevant. So I suppose from the perspective of what's on your website or what's on your marketing material, I would go back to the original point I made, which is to look at the USPs that you currently market to your clients, whatever your unique selling points, and ask yourself these questions. What does this do for the client? And then if you can reinterpret those messages and lead with what pain this solves, what issue this resolves, and leads with that and then justifies with the USP afterwards. As I said earlier, for the CEO with lawyers, for example, it might be, well, we can help you make faster, more reliable business decisions. For the CEO, what's important is faster and reliable. And then they say, because we give you access to our partners. I would go back and look at all my USPs, and I would find a great way to be able to turn them from simple logical reasons to emotional benefits that they deliver, and then lead with the benefits. And I would change all my marketing materials, all my letters, all my emails, all my brochures on that principle. In terms of qualifying the individual in the networking situation, I think we've covered that. And in terms of the messaging for presentations, it's about taking those original messages that you created, your points of compelling relevance, and structuring your presentation on the basis of what you're going to deliver for them. And that's where you use your points of compelling relevance. That's where you make a powerful impression from the start. And that's where you'll be different from everybody else who's pitching from the same business. So hopefully that's giving you a couple of ideas around that.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another one from Mr. Paul Greasley. The question is, thank you for a most practical presentation. As a person of global influence, what cultural differences do you see in meeting people and connecting with them?
I think that's a very good question, and I'd have to say I'm not a specialist in cultural change, although I've done a fair bit of work in places such as Doha and Dubai and various other places, and out in as far as the Far East, as far as Malaysia and right across. So I've had some cultural engagement in that space. But I suppose the main difference is in how people initially connect with each other. So what we call the 2-minute contact, or first contact, when we meet people first. So the appropriateness of body language, the appropriateness of handshakes, the appropriateness of eye contact, and so on and so forth. It's been culturally sensitive. I think in terms of what I've spoken about here, in terms of how we shift our messaging in a way that is meaningful first and then logical secondly, so we deliver the value first and then the logical reason about why we and how we deliver that, how we structure our presentations, and in fact, the concepts and principles of networking that I shared with you, none of those areas actually relate to any cultural differentiation. Most people in the world are familiar with networking and like to be engaged in an effective and respectful way. Most people will respond to the, well, in fact, all people will respond to the way I've indicated to you to rechange or restructure your presentations. And everybody in the world, regardless of culture, is first driven by emotion and second by logic. So what I've shared here is culturally relevant no matter where you are in the world. But in terms of how you build rapid rapport, how you build engagement with people on a first contact basis, the interpersonal, the immediate interpersonal engagement, that's where it becomes significantly different. There are some cultural changes there. But in terms of what we talked about here, Paul, I think it's absolutely relevant no matter where you are.
Thank you very much. Let me go. A caller has raised hand. We have Dr. Muhammad Rashad Faridi. Doctor, could you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, hello, I'm Dr. Rashad. I'm a professor at the College of Business Administration in the Public University in Saudi Arabia. And thank you very much, Sean, for your presentation. And especially for me, when I'm on a daily basis, almost scheduling with my students, engaging them in terms of teaching them in the classroom. So I appreciate like your parameters of the stories and questions, humor. So how about like what are your tips when, since I'm on a continuous basis meeting these students on a regular basis, and there has to be some differentiation or something from the next conversation I have. So what are your thoughts on that? Because if you have the continuous, the same these criteria, so maybe it may be the same, or you need some difference to engage them more or excite my students extra. What's your thoughts about that?
Thank you, Dr. Rashid. I think really where students are concerned, particularly you're dealing with the people who are either even a post-millennial generation, so their attention spans are becoming even shorter, and it's becoming even shorter because of their level of digital engagement that they have. I think a key thing in terms of learning today is very much about sharing ownership. So in other words, rather than seeing ourselves as the expert who must deliver what we do, really what's becoming more and more important is how well we facilitate their engagement. In other words, break them into small working groups, and let them identify the objectives they want to get out of the particular program, give them project work that they work within as a team, actually in the workshop environment. So the more that there's a certain degree of peer-to-peer learning, that they're learning from each other, or at least discussing challenges or problems with each other, and then you simply leverage expertise or knowledge into areas where they don't have it to help them understand, and if you like, organically learn, that is a very powerful and compelling way to get groups to work. I do a lot of individual coaching, but I do a lot of group coaching for those who want to accelerate their business, or indeed for leaders who need to learn these sort of engagement skills. And I find that what's most effective is not my standing up there sharing information with them, as would be the case in your situation, but it's about the questions that I pose, and it's about the level of learning that they do from each other. And then when they come up with problems and they can't resolve those problems, I give them the information they can work with to resolve them. So to engage them more effectively, to have more of their attention, it's very much about getting them to engage with each other and becoming more of a facilitator rather than simply a lecturer. And hopefully that'll help.
Yeah, I think, Sean, thanks for your inputs and your insights. I'll be glad to be in touch with you after the presentation. Thank you very much.
Look forward to that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad, for your call. So let me go. There's one a lengthy question. So let me try to summarize it. We have from Mr. Ali Al-Nashdi. The question is, I'm working in business and development, a private college in Saudi Arabia, BMC, and usually people feel offended when I ask many questions. How can I connect with clients and ask them many questions without giving them the feeling that I'm putting more pressures on them? I'm working in business and development, and usually people feel offended when I ask many questions. Okay, he just repeated the same question.
I think the issue is to, and this is very important, I assume we're talking about a networking situation, for example. The key thing about networking is always about the other person. It's not about you. So what we're looking to do is create a situation where people will get to know us and to like us and to trust us. So really, most of the conversation, where it's appropriate, should be really about them, about what they do, about their connection with the event. The more you get them to do the talking, the more in rapport with you they will become. And the reason is that the people in the world that we're most comfortable with are ourselves. So if I can facilitate a conversation that allows the other person to converse with me, to talk with me, to share time with me, they will become more and more comfortable with me. Now that means that the questions are more focused on them, not focused on business. If I start leading conversations with my business needs and what my business does and what their business does, and I haven't built a relationship with them first, then I'm most likely that they will find themselves offended or intruded upon, because really I just simply look like I'm looking to get something from them. I haven't really presented the fact that I'm interested in them. If I want to be an influencer, I've got to show that I'm impressed and I'm interested in them first. And then only after that has been achieved can I then position business opportunities or what I do. Because it's quite natural that if you spend a lot of time finding out about them, they'll then come around and want to find out about you, and that's where you will position your business values, not by simply leading with questions that are all about their business and what you can do for them. Build a personal relationship first, and the professional piece follows. Be an influencer first and an expert second. And that's the best way to do that.
Well, thank you very much. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. Mr. Sean Weafer, any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss that?
No, very happy. Thank you to be invited to give the presentation. I trust it's been of value to those who've been listening. The main thing is to bear in mind it's important to not just be professional, but to be personable. So if you want to be an influencer, if you want to compel attention, it's not enough just to be technically very good at what you do or not just very good to be a leader. You must, in today's world, first be an influencer. So in order to be a high trust leader or a high trust advisor, focus on the person, then focus on the business.
Thank you very much, and everybody is appreciating in the comment box, and they really like the presentation. So I really want to thank you on behalf of Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for taking the time to share this valuable information and a very, very intriguing presentation. So once again, thank you very much, Mr. Sean Weafer, for your time and presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thank you all of those.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar and for excellent questions and making it an interactive experience for all of us. We are recording it. Please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn more about our upcoming webinars and equally to access the recorded versions. With that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.